deceleration plays a big part in sports, but it also plays a big part in avoiding non-contact ACL injuries, since a lot of these non-contact ACL injuries are occurring when athletes enter this flex knee pattern but with an upright torso position. So this at least creates a need for us to incorporate some deceleration training material. So let's dive into what are some of the common practices, what are not good about these things, and how we need to go about developing deceleration in our training. Now, there's many variations of the deceleration pattern because it's not always just linear, it's multi-directional, but the common theme with all of these is that braking leg, in the front braking leg, we're avoiding that knee collapsing inwards. And what we do to prevent this happening is create rotation around the hip. So not only does this prevent the knee from collapsing in, but it also creates a necessary tension around the hip to help work to mitigate some of the forces coming through that braking leg. So what's interesting, if we take a look at a sport like tennis, this is kind of built into many of the shots these athletes have to play. Since when they're braking, they're having to play the shot over top of that leg, and this creates that rotation around the hip necessary to do exactly what we're talking about. Now on the opposite end, this also rules out the value of using bilateral loaded exercises like squats and RDLs to develop the deceleration pattern, because they don't have that rotation around the hip element built into it. Because the legs are fixed, we can't address the most common thing that we need in all of these patterns, and that's the hip rotating through in this front leg. Now the next common theme within these multi-directional braking patterns is the fact that the muscles work in an isometric condition. Now they do this because this allows them to handle the most amount of force, but more importantly, for example, in a flex knee deceleration pattern, it allows the body to redistribute force away from vulnerable areas like the ACL and divide it over multiple joints and areas of the body that are more capable of dealing with this force. Now this is important because this is where a lot of people get tripped up, because a lot of people are still utilizing eccentric loading as a means of training deceleration qualities. Now the thing is, eccentric loading is working on the lengthening of the muscle. So not only is it addressing a different muscle action, it's also working on that force all around that area. So for example, with the eccentric loaded squat, it's really putting a lot through the hips and the knees, and it's missing the most important thing, and that's distributing force away from vulnerable areas of the body, distributing force away from these knees and dividing it over multiple joints so the body is more equipped to deal with these impinging and high forces. Now, another common practice to work on deceleration is to utilize these loaded lunge patterns. Now, the very first point I made in this video is that a lot of the ACL injuries, non-contact that is, are going to occur when we enter these flex knee patterns with an upright torso. So if you're hitting lunge patterns where we're flexing this leg and we're maintaining this upright position, you're literally teaching yourself how to not protect the knee when we enter these deceleration patterns when the knee needs to be flexed. So that removes the need for that. But let's say that you do correct the torso position, it remains upright when the leg's extended and it flexes into the pattern. The movement itself is too slow still. Their muscle action is a shortening to lengthening action, and it's not the isometric contraction that we want. So this removes the value in using unilateral split squat, lunge patterns, as well as squats and RDLs as effective means of training deceleration abilities. Okay, so moving away from loaded gym variations, let's take a look at some jumping stuff. So let's take a look specifically at, say, a drop jump. So with the drop jump, now we're starting to address the actual contraction required of the muscle that we utilize in deceleration. So we're using it in an isometric condition as opposed to ones that we discussed earlier. And if you were to land on a single leg, now we can start to integrate some sort of rotation around the hip as discussed earlier as well. But even so, in terms of training the deceleration ability and the deceleration pattern, nothing's going to be better than actually training deceleration patterns. So let's take a look at that. Now, when we start working deceleration patterns, not only do we get that element of specificity, but we also start working on what I'm going to refer to as the negative steps. And these are those steps that lead up to that braking step. And now if we observe the best athletes in the world that are very good at performing this pattern, what we're going to notice is they're going to adopt more of an upright torso position as they go through these negative steps before entering that more flexed torso position with a flexed knee pattern. So that's what we want to see from a technical aspect, and that's what we want to start to address and integrate into our training material when we're focused on deceleration work. So the main takeaway here is that when it comes to developing the deceleration pattern, we need to train actual deceleration work in our training. We need to move away from loaded gym variations like squats, lunges, RDLs, eccentric loading. We need to stop thinking that these are the key to developing these abilities and start working actual deceleration patterns, start developing the technical aspects discussed in this video in order to provide our body with more protection, but also to elevate our performance to another level.